Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Luzanne Lottering. I'm the marketing manager here at Cardiolog Analytics, and I'm joined today by Microsoft MVP and SharePoint and Microsoft Teams expert Hilton Gissenau. I'll go ahead and kick things off. So today's webinar is on how bots in Teams can help drive collaboration and increase user adoption. So let's begin with a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. If you want to share this with a colleague, we will go ahead and send an email with the recording after today's session. And of course, if you have any questions, please do send them through the questions box within the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll leave some time towards the end for Q&A. And you can also connect with us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @Cardiolog. In regards to the agenda for today's webinar, we will start out with a very short introduction. I will talk a bit about Cardiolog Analytics and who we are, and then Hilton will go ahead, introduce himself, and dive right into the topic, explaining what bots are and what they can do in Teams. And he will also talk about adoption and collaboration in Teams, with special focus on measuring and driving adoption. I will then go over Cardiolog Analytics for Teams and walk you through how you can not only track usage and productivity in Teams and pinpoint those inactive teams and users, but also how to leverage our engagement bot to encourage greater collaboration in Teams. And then again at the end, we will take some questions, so please feel free to send your questions throughout the course of this presentation. I'll start off with a brief introduction. Cardiolog Analytics has been around for about 15 years now, since 2005, and we are based out of Boston. And over the past 15 years, we've been focused on analytics and engagement designed for SharePoint, Teams, and Office 365. Our flagship solution is Cardiolog Analytics, and it's built specifically for internal platforms, including all versions of SharePoint from 2010 up to 2019, but also SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams, our topic today, OneDrive, Exchange, and also Yammer. Solutions are available both on-prem and as a SaaS version based on Power BI. So our goal at Cardiolog Analytics is to help our customers to constantly improve Office 365. That's what it's all about. And that will be based on how it's being used. So there are usually 4 pillars that we talk to our customers about. The first is monitor, which is tracking the usage within SharePoint and Teams, OneDrive, Exchange, and so on. And the second is engaging users, asking them what their needs are, what their pain points are, and what's not working for them. And then the next pillar is to enhance. We want to make sure that we are obviously constantly improving SharePoint and Teams and so on based on those 2 pillars. So the idea is to have actionable metrics, which will then allow us to constantly make Office 365 platforms better for our users. And then the last pillar is securing Office 365 by enforcing permissions and access and identifying breaches of information and securing confidential data. So now I will go ahead and hand things over to Hilton, who will introduce himself and jump into the presentation.
Okay, hey everybody. Thanks, Suzanne, for that lovely introduction.
We can see your presentation and we can see you, and we are very excited. Thank you very much, Hilton.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thank you, everybody. So I'm very excited to talk to you today about some of my absolute greatest passions all combined together. We're going to talk about adoption. We're going to talk about collaboration, we're going to talk about teams, and we're going to talk about bots in teams. So as I mentioned, 4 of the things that I am most passionate about, and I'm hoping to share a lot of information with you. I'm very excited to do so today. Before we do so, just a quick introduction. In case it's not clear, that's me, not that one. I do love bots, but I am, last time I checked, a regular living, breathing human. In terms of that, just a super quick overview of me. I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years. pretty much all of that in the Microsoft space, and 11 times Microsoft MVP, and principally focused, certainly in the early days, on SharePoint. But increasingly, as I'm sure many of you, certainly those in the SharePoint game, are more focused or increasingly focused on Office 365. And that's the broader suite, things like Power Apps and Flow and so on. But Teams obviously being a big part of that. My passion is around collaboration. So certainly rather than, let's say, record keeping, for example, so the Teams tool is a big part of what we do. In terms of day job, so to speak, do a lot of consulting globally, clients all around the world from east to west, up and down, on things like strategy, adoption, and so on around, traditionally, as I said, the SharePoint platform and broadly Office 365, and certainly Teams a big increasing part of that regularly as well. So that's sometimes work with training or adoption planning, things like that, but we also do a lot of customization around Teams, so that will be building custom apps for Teams platforms and the various versions and forms that takes. So we'll talk about some of those today and understand what's available and how we can do some of the customization in Teams. And in addition to the sort of services or consulting work that we do, I'm also the founder of a company called chitchatter.com, which is a relatively new startup. So that's an exciting new venture for me, if you like. And the focus there is on Teams apps, apps that will actually go into the store. So if you search for our name in the Teams store, or you search for one or two of the apps, then you'll see some of them coming through. I'm going to demo one or two of them as we go through, because the context helps to explain some of what I want to share with you in the bot space. So if you search for any of those apps, you'll find us, and you'll find the apps. And we've also got a couple that are not in the store yet, but in the process of either being developed or going through beta or so on. And we'll see some of those as well. Again, very key to some of the things that I'm very keen on and want to show you a little bit about as well. On the right side of the screen, you'll see the obviously contact details, so please feel free to get in touch on any of the platforms, email, LinkedIn, etc., etc. Very active on the communities as well. The bottom link there, for example, is Stack Overflow. So if you have development teams or you are a developer and you're struggling with Teams topics, you'll see that I'm very active on the Stack Overflow platform and try and contribute to a lot of the open source projects around this stuff as well. So as I mentioned, very passionate about the stuff that we do, so I'd like to get very involved in it. In terms of agenda, specifically what we're going to be talking about, we're going to discuss a little bit around adoption and collaboration and understand a little bit about what those mean in particular in a Teams context. We'll talk then about understanding some of the capabilities for customizing and extending Teams. We'll look at some of the out-of-box capabilities, and then some of the more advanced development customization capabilities as well. In particular, we'll focus on bots, and what you'll see is that the term bot actually is very interesting in a Teams context. It means more than one might think it means from a customization perspective. There are a few elements in Teams and customization elements in Teams that are powered by bots, even though that might not seem immediately intuitive from the outset. We'll look a little bit at what's involved in actually going ahead and building or invoking some of the bot capabilities. Sometimes that involves maybe developing a custom bot, things like that. But there are multiple options to doing that, each of which has their own negatives and positives. So we'll look at a few of the different options and understand some of the pluses and minuses of each one, or the aspects, shall we say, of each one, to see what might be better for your particular scenarios. And then to wrap us up, we'll talk a little bit about adoption in bots and adoption in Teams particularly. And I'll hand back to Dazan to talk to you about some of the great things that Cardiolog have and offer to support some of that capability. But she'll pick up on that later on. Okay, so to get us started, the first element around adoption. I'm sure many of you on the call have some experience in SharePoint or come from a SharePoint background in some way, shape, or form. And if you have and you've been around for a while, I use SharePoint as an example. That's my background, but I'm sure it's probably shared with a lot of people on the call. You'll recall that in the early days of SharePoint, and certainly this is true for a lot of enterprise software, the adoption process, the change management and adoption style process is very much, certainly in the earlier days in our industry, has been very much focused on a top-down whip or carrot and stick kind of approach, very much focused on a stick, if you like. So, you know, we as a company, for example, have put in SharePoint, and this is now the new homepage of your browser, and you will use SharePoint. And we've all learned that as an adoption technique is not particularly effective. Us as customers and vendors and partners and so on in the Microsoft space, and certainly Microsoft as the primary vendor over time have learned that lesson quite extensively and come to understand that we can't simply force these tools down the throats of users. We need to be a lot more gentle in terms of the actual adoption. So in the Teams space and broadly in Office 365 as well, Microsoft have a huge number of resources dedicated to assist us as customers or partners in some way to be more successful in terms of adoption. So I put the address on the bottom there. If you're not familiar with this, there is a site called adoption.microsoft.com. And there's a subsection there inside specifically for Teams. It's more broad in terms of the Office 365 suites and feature sets. So there's a lot of great content in there. Obviously, our focus today is Teams. So looking at some of what that means, for instance, there is a great set of sort of interactive magazines that Microsoft provides. For instance, there are some wonderful day in the life kind of worksheets and sheets to sort of explain what we're trying to do and show some of the best practices and how some of these things can manifest. For example, these are 2 examples, and you can see there's a whole list of them. Some of them focus on a particular role, others focus on a particular industry, and some very interesting ones. I don't know if you can see the small print there, but for instance, there's a scenario of Teams in the case of a federal judge or somebody in the finance department or the construction industry, congressional leader, etc., etc. So there's some wonderful resources that Microsoft provides. As I mentioned, these come off the site adoption.microsoft.com, and you can even see here that they've contextualized a lot of these things. So it depends on where you are in the life cycle, what you might be interested in. Aside from adoption, there are adoption-related things like governance checklists and quick starts and specific scenarios, etc., etc. So Microsoft does and has provided us a tremendous amount of support and facilitation in terms of going forward with adoption in Teams. Certainly not something that we've had in previous products, shall we say. However, not everybody fully agrees. If anybody recognizes this photo, this is the CEO of Slack. Teams is most well-known competitor. You could argue he perhaps has some element of an agenda in terms of putting out a headline like this. But certainly, if one goes back to earlier in the year 2020, you can see the headline here that according to this Stuart Butterfield, the CEO here, that Teams only has, in his opinion, a 20% adoption rate. So the argument he's making here is that in his feeling, and of course you can go ahead and read the article, up at the URL down there, Teams has a much lower adoption rate than he would expect it to potentially have. However, you can see the date there, a little small, but that's earlier on in 2020. I think we can all appreciate that 2020 has been an interesting and a challenging and interesting year for pretty much everybody of the human race and otherwise. Even bots have had some challenges. But nevertheless, in terms of adoption for the platform, I think what we've been able to see is that there has been an adoption exercise and an adoption tool in the space of these kind of SaaS products that far, far, far exceeds what any individual human can do. We've of course seen the COVID-19 virus, and what we've ultimately seen is that COVID has proven to be the absolute ultimate adoption tool for the likes of Teams, Slack, Zoom, and many other capabilities as well. So if we look at, for example, some research and some articles and so on, I've put a link down at the bottom there. This is an article looking at some of the adoption in Teams, and we can see quite interestingly the absolute perfect shape of that, so to speak, hockey stick curve that one absolutely dreams of in terms of adoption. There's no doubt that Teams adoption was doing tremendously well anyway, but 2020 has obviously seen that shoot almost completely off of the charts. We see some further down in the same article, for example, all kinds of interesting headlines, and I want to focus on 3 particularly. Microsoft, you can see here, is the fastest growing business app ever in history, and this exceeds Microsoft. This is in the business world ever in software, used by 91 of the Fortune 100 companies. Now, obviously, that doesn't represent every business, but there is a direct statistic there of 91% of the top biggest companies in the world, so to speak, using Teams, and 894% Teams adoption since COVID-19 began. So tremendous adoption. We're certainly seeing the tool get used like it never has before, and far more than any of us could ever possibly imagine. However, we do need to ask the question, what exactly does that mean? What exactly does that mean in terms of usage and in terms of adoption? What we're seeing with clients, for example, is that they are using Teams very extensively. As an example, we had one client who we were talking quite a bit with about Teams earlier on in the year, and we had some training that we were discussing and proposing on. And once COVID hit, there was a massive pivot there, because no longer did we need to train the organization in Teams. We had to suddenly rather figure out how do we train them in different usage of Teams, because within an instant, virtually overnight, everybody had it installed, everybody signed in, and everybody had made or participated in a number of calls. So everybody, in the broader sense, is able to, or familiar with what Teams is, and has very likely joined on, either made a call, joined on a call, something along those lines. However, and this is what the point of this picture is, the ability to be on a call does not successful adoption by Teams make in any way, shape, or form. And obviously, it's a little bit more than pure voice. You know, a lot of companies are on mobile Teams, and I hope the emphasis on this picture is a little is coming through, that just moving to mobile doesn't necessarily bring us all the way into the future. And we might be on video even. So, you know, we've gone beyond just voice, and now we're doing some video as well. But again, what does that really mean in terms of adoption of Teams as an overall tool? This is a graph from an actual real customer. I'm obviously not going to mention names, but this is actual data from a customer that we pulled several weeks ago, I think early on in September. Across this was some of the out-of-the-box analytics that's available to everybody who is an Office 365 customer. So you'll have things like this in your tenancy. And it's pretty basic analytics. And of course, the Cardiolog suite provides much more detail and much greater capabilities. But it was interesting to be able to give us some interesting information. This is across the Office 365 suite. So we weren't particularly interested in this overview in terms of things like OneDrive and intranet and so on. For the purposes of what we're talking about on this call now, what I wanted to emphasize was that you can see a tremendous usage of chats in the Teams tool, but very, very, very little conversations. So what does that mean? That means, for example, that people are using Teams in meetings and using a lot of chats in meetings, or using chats one-to-one. But there's very little communication in the context of an actual Teams team, or a channel inside of an actual Teams team, which one could argue in some ways is at least a sort of a proxy for actual collaboration. So there's communication going on, but very little collaboration using the Teams team more broadly. And so the point of that really is to say that we want to understand that using Teams more than just for voice and video, and getting the tremendous value that the tool provides. Gartner have a quote here, for instance, that what we're seeing today is a collection of ever-changing multi-vendor productivity applications that replace the classic applications that we're used to using. So we're all familiar with the likes of Outlook and SharePoint and so on. And essentially the idea with those is that you will go to the different tools. So you will load Excel, you will create the spreadsheet, you will save it to your local PC, you will create an email, you will attach it, you will send that to other people, and so on. And so we're bouncing continually between all of these different tools. The idea with Teams is really to completely turn that idea on its head. Those of you familiar with the very popular Cobra Kai TV show, for example, on Netflix, will recognize this character and the idea of flipping the script, essentially, and turning that idea on its head, and really saying Teams gives us the opportunity to engage in collaboration in a very different way. So in the same way that SharePoint, for example, the classic challenge we had in adoption was trying to get the users to do the right thing, so to speak, and get them to go over to SharePoint rather than to save documents on their personal workstations, for instance. This was a continual challenge in the SharePoint space. We were continually trying and encouraging the users to come over there where we needed them to be. And in fact, the truth is it really went beyond that rather than just a single application. As I mentioned, we had all the apps vying for the users' attentions. The Office apps, in terms of document creation with the PowerPoints and Excels and Words and so on. We had Outlook vying for their attention, trying to get them to send the email somewhere. We had SharePoint trying to get them to put the information in certain places, Dropbox, OneDrive, etc., etc. So all of these things, as I mentioned, were vying for the user's attention. The idea with Teams rather is to, so to speak, bring us our breakfast in bed. It's to bring all of the information to us. So in short, what I'm proposing is that collaboration in Teams is using Teams more effectively as an application platform and having the data come to you. This is an example I found on the internet. I don't even know what app it is, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. When we're using Teams more effectively as a collaboration platform, what we're doing, for example, is we're having the information come to us in the form of tabs, inside of channels, inside of Teams, for example, and in the form of bots as well, which we'll mention in just a moment. But if you take a user scenario, for instance, presume that I am wanting to hire a new member of the team and engage HR, for example. What I want to do is use Teams to actually initiate that engagement and have an HR tool guide me through the process of being aware that there's a new employee CV to be evaluated, a resume to be evaluated, for example, helping me do that evaluation inside of the tool and immediately, for example, reject or approve the candidate to go to the next stage, things along those lines. So it's about bringing that world of work to me inside of a single tool, a single pane of glass, so to speak, rather than having me go everywhere else. And as we saw with the tab, for example, that's one form of the extensibility and customization Teams. Bots really simply build on that and provide a different version. It's the idea of having the bot serve us directly inside of Teams and enable us to do more, to be more effective and be more productive by having experiences inside of Teams. However, as soon as we say that, we have to also be a little bit conscious of what a bot means and what bot interaction means. Many people hail 2016, for example, as the year of the bot. I forget exactly who it was, but one of the large IT corporate CEOs, for instance, was referring to 2016 as the year of the bot, for example. And it's always something that, certainly before I got into bot development and got into Teams and bots in that way, was something that always struck me as strange, because the first thing, I guess, that jumps to mind when you work with bots, and I'm sure many of you have interacted with a customer service bot on a retail website or something along those lines, is that interacting with the bot can be in some ways, although one can achieve what one wants to do and effective in that way, it's a very slow and stilted approach to interacting with a service, interacting with a piece of software. So for instance, in this case, we're ordering a food and the user has to type, I would like to order some food. They have to type in this OTP number, for example. They're typing in the things that they actually want. And it's impressive and interesting from a technology perspective, but from an interaction perspective as a user, it quickly leads to frustration if everything they need to do now becomes this very slow form of interaction. And as we can all imagine, on mobile, even on desktop, you'll excuse me for some of the impolite words in here. This is just a screenshot I found, but I think it brings the point home that interaction from a text-based perspective is certainly not the ideal in any way, shape, or form. It's very easy, of course, to do typos, and these days with autocorrect, that simply makes things a lot worse. So over time, interactions have come about on bot platforms to make this a little bit easier. For instance, here we have a form of menu inside of a bot interaction where the user can simply click on an item and simply click on an option and so on. So this becomes a lot easier. But nevertheless, you can see the conversation progressing from screen to screen. Of course, this would be vertical. We're just showing it here to show the overall interaction. But it still can be quite a slow and laborious process interacting with the bot in this way. So text-based interaction can be effective in some cases, and I'll show you some instances where I certainly think that it can be useful. But if you have a multi-step conversation going on, what we refer to as a dialogue in the bot world, that can be a sometimes challenging form of interaction. So, in fact, just a last thought on that, I like to liken it to the old days where we were all delighted when we got away from the DOS command line interface and finally went to Windows. The whole idea of this kind of Windows-based interaction was that it was a lot more graphical and there was a lot less opportunity for error mistyping things and so on by simply pointing and clicking. In the same way as Microsoft bought us Windows, what they've bought us in the bot world, and it's not limited to the bot world at all, but what they've bought us in the bot world is this idea of what's referred to as adaptive cards. And the idea here, incidentally, they're used in other places in Microsoft. You can get an adaptive card directly in an email. You get them appearing inside of some experiences in Windows, for example, and they work across platforms. So you can see the same bot on a desktop in a web page, inside of an Android and inside of an iOS device as well. The idea behind these adaptive cards is that, as I mentioned, sometimes text interaction is fine for the bot scenario, but sometimes you need something like a Windows Forms type scenario, but a mini version of that. Rather than an entire application, you just want a small interaction for a specific scenario. So if we look at the idea of a food order from the previous interactions, rather than a backwards and forwards, you can simply choose your item just once with your mouse. You can kind of go from top to bottom, specify all your options and click OK. And we have the idea of a Windows application, but that interaction being hosted inside of a bot conversation. So we kind of get the best of both worlds. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. I've got some screenshots here, but I'm going to punch through them. I'm actually going to show you these live. I just have the screenshots in case anything goes wrong with the internet, as it occasionally does. But I'm going to jump over now into a Teams scenario and show you some of these things actually running live. So this is just a demo Teams tenant that I run. So this is, in fact, I thought we'd be on Teams for this call, but of course we won't go to webinar. But I have a different tendency here just for doing test-based interactions. So we can see here that we're inside of a particular channel inside of a team. But I want to show you, and you'll be familiar, for example, with obviously the tabs at the top and the ability to embed certain out-of-the-box applications. We have one of our applications that we've built that manifests here as a tab inside of Teams. But what I want to show you is bot-based interactions. So I'm going to go ahead, for instance, and show you one of the tools that we've got that uses a file-based, that uses a command line interaction. So what I'm going to do is get a link to a file, and you'll be familiar with trying to paste one of these links inside of a chat and inside of Teams, and we get these sometimes very long interactions. If it's a SharePoint file, it's not even actually that bad. But if we go ahead and get a Teams file, some of those links can be very painful to go ahead and use inside of an email message or inside of a Teams chat, something like that. The actual link that appears there can often be longer than the actual message that we're trying to write to somebody. So we built an extensibility for Teams that appears here in terms of the command bar. And interestingly enough, the way that you do this is by building a bot in Teams. This actually takes the form of a traditional bot interaction inside of Teams. So the way that you'd fire this up is you go ahead and call the short links app, for example. You go ahead and pop that short link in, and it'll go ahead and build you a short link. If you're familiar with something like Bitly, for example, it's the same idea essentially as what you're doing there, and you can go ahead and copy that and paste that link in, for instance. So again, this is just one of our apps. You know, I'm obviously quite proud of what we built, but it's just an idea of an interaction. What I wanted to show you is that these commands are available inside of Teams, and these, similar to other things, take the form of bots. In addition, I'm sure many of you have either worked with or seen demos of some of these capabilities in Teams, the ability to use the message interactions here. So for example, if we want to go ahead and pop in the weather for a particular city, let's just for argument's sake say London, what it will do is it will go ahead and embed that into the message. So if I wanted to you know, create a message and have something like that embedded into a chat conversation, for example, these are what are called message extensions inside of Teams. These also are implemented using bot technology. And finally, the last one is what also called a message extension, but this time this is a composed message extension. This is an actual message extension. The terminology is a little wonky in the Microsoft world. But this is, again, one of our tools, as it happens, something called reminders. And what this allows you to do is to go ahead and set a reminder on a message. So in fact, I've picked one from above there, but let's see if we have, we don't have an actual message from Nesta. Let's do that inside of the team. Maybe that'll look a little bit better. So if I go here, for example, into this R&D team, and I go ahead and find a message from one of the other users, let's say Adele's message here, for instance, I can go ahead and set a reminder based on that. So if she's asked me to do something, I can go ahead and have a reminder set to myself, let's say in a week's time, where I'll go ahead and actually get that the reminder based on that particular message that was sent. And again, all of these interactions, that actual message-based interaction, or the extension inside of there, is actually driven by bots in Teams. Now, in the case of our reminders tool, for example, the actual reminder itself will come through in the chat with the actual bot itself. That short links bot, for instance, is no other interaction, but the reminder bot actually allows you to have that form of interaction. So when you install the application, for example, you have the ability to go ahead and add a reminder directly like this, for instance. So once again, you're seeing a web-based kind of interaction. So the bot is launching a web form or an adaptive card, but basically launching a user interface that enables me to have an interaction inside of the bot conversation. But I can also speak to the bot in a text-based format. So this is one of the bots where having a text format can work very well. So for example, we'll say here, remind me to give presentation in 3 minutes. Just as a sort of a contrived example here. But what the bot will do is it will go ahead and understand that text. It's understanding that it's asking for a reminder as opposed to help or one of the other interactions that we support. It understands that there's a subject, that there's something it needs to do, and it understands that there's a time element based to that, and it'll go ahead and actually understand what that means and put a reminder together. In this case, it's just sending a verification. But if we leave it as is, the reminder's been accepted, and in 3 minutes or so, we should get an actual reminder coming through. So again, the idea here is that we have all of these different kinds of interactions powered by bots inside of Teams. I'm going to show you one more of the apps that we built because it's very focused on bots, and I think hopefully shows a lot of how, particularly how collaboration can be enhanced through the use of bots. So what we have here is what we call a welcome bot or an onboarding bot. It's kind of like a welcome buddy if you're familiar with something like that. And basically what this bot does is it takes a new user or a new employee or new member of the organization, if you're an NGO, for example, or an NPO at least, through the process of coming on board and joining the company. We're in demo mode, just there's a bit of extra messaging, but basically what it's doing is it's showing the user a menu effectively that they can interact with. Again, all of this inside of a bot communication format. So I have interactive elements in the form of these adaptive cards, as I mentioned, or different kinds of cards. Adaptive cards is the main one, but I can also go ahead and embed interactions in there. So for instance, if you've got a welcome message from a CEO, user can watch that all within the Teams experience. We also have a Q&A engine built in there. So if I have, let's say, use an acronym ABC quite a lot, and I've joined the organization and I don't know what this is, and I'm too embarrassed to ask somebody, I can go ahead and actually ask the bot, what is an ABC? I've been seeing this this acronym popping up in documentation or in meetings, for example. In the old days, if you joined a company, you actually used to go into a building. So you might want to say something like, where is the toilet? Or where are the bathrooms, for example? And we've got some of the AI engines that Microsoft provides so that it can understand various versions of the question to be able to go ahead and answer questions like that. So the idea here was really just to show you that there are many types of interactions that are bot powered inside of Teams, and then also important to know that the bot has multiple places where it can manifest itself. So for instance, here's one of our bots appearing inside of the chat inside of a particular Teams channel. We've also seen what's called a one-to-one experience where we can message a bot as an installed app, and we can go ahead and, for instance, pin it or unpin it on the main menu. And then finally, inside of Teams, we also have the idea of a chat where we can interact either with a bot or we can be interacting with one or more people. And likewise, the bot can appear inside of that interaction as well. Either tabs or bots can appear inside of those interactions. Okay, so back to the slides. That's what I wanted to show you in terms of what bots are inside of Teams, and hopefully I've given you a little bit of information and a little bit of excitement about why you might want to be using a bot inside of Teams. So what I want to do now is just show you if that's something that's interesting to you, how could we go ahead and create bots or create certain kinds of bot interactions inside of Teams. Don't you love that picture? That's such a great idea of us building the bots. I think that was a perfect picture. And what I want to show you is that, fortunately, there are a lot of ways that we can build these kind of interactions inside of Teams. And some of them are very simple. Some of them are quite complex, and some of them sort of fall somewhere in the middle. But there are sort of pluses and minuses to each of the different approaches. So I want to take you through a few of those, and we'll see some of how parts of that manifest. Just to get us up and running, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Power Automate, as Microsoft calls it now. I'm sure you're all familiar with the name of Flow. I still call it Flow for better or worse. And we're going to go ahead and create a new flow just to see how we can go ahead and create a bot-based interaction very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new kind of flow here inside of Power Automate, and let's just call it cardiolog demo. For instance, and we'll go ahead and create a manual flow. So what that means is I need to manually trigger it by pushing a button or, on the desktop, or pushing it on my phone or something along those lines. This isn't a particularly complicated a demo that we're going to do, but I'm just going to show you how we can go ahead and send a message directly to Teams. So in this case, probably the easiest thing we can do is post a message directly to the user. So I'll post the message directly to my own user account from inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my email address in, and this is the demo scenario. I'm logged in with a lady called Megan, and I'll say, hello, Megan, and go ahead and pop in a subject, for example. Okay, so not the most complicated or super useful scenario, but hopefully what it does is give us an idea of how we can go ahead and build some of these interactions very quickly. So if I go ahead and run this flow, we should see everything working successfully, and we've seen there that it's able to sign in and work correctly. So we'll go ahead and actually run the flow, and let's see if everything works successfully. I'm going to head over to Teams quickly, and what we should see is, yeah, there we go. Immediately we see that that flow has sent us a message, so we can see the interaction. So there's the subject, and there's the message that I sent. So very easily, as part of any kind of flow, so let's say a user tags us on Twitter, for example, tags our organization, for example, we can go ahead and have flow send us a message into a channel in Teams or to message us directly. Notice that if we're using flow, it appears again through a bot-based interaction, and it appears through a predefined bot here called the flow bot. So that may or may not be a good thing. It's certainly something to be aware of. May or may not suit your scenario, but it's important to be aware of. Here's another example of a Teams bot interaction based on flow, where you can go ahead and select a particular message similar to what we saw before, and have that appear as an interaction inside of Teams. So, for instance, if I go ahead and select this message, I've created a new extension here, something called Do Thing. You can see the little Flowbot icon, and you can have it go ahead and load up an adaptive card if necessary. But in this case, we're going to have it go ahead and reply to the message with the message "This is cool" to whatever message was selected. So some great capabilities in terms of what we can do. One thing to be aware of, though, also is that you'll notice the little word preview here in all of these actions. So they do work successfully, and Microsoft is building these out at a tremendous pace. But do be aware that these actions are still in a preview state, these actions inside of Flow. So they are potentially subject to some sort of change or potentially even being removed. And certainly up to some sort of flux in the Microsoft space. So just be aware of that, but certainly a very, very easy and capability and a very low bar to entry to be able to message into Teams or to message users and so on with sometimes quite rich interactions as well. So that's one way that we can work with, we'll go ahead and create, as I was very careful in terms of my wording, this is not creating a bot, but this is enabling a bot-based interaction. Recall that we're using the flow bot to send our messages, for example, either that or they come as if they come from us directly. So just be aware of that. Notice this example, for instance, it's coming as if sent from the Megan Bauer user. So if Deborah would do this action, it would also come as Megan Bauer. So just be aware of that. There are some drawbacks to some of these capabilities, but certainly bot-like capabilities. If we take a next stage up and we look at actually going ahead and trying to build a bot, what we can see is in terms of a level of complexity, the next thing worth looking at as part of the Power family, we looked at Power Automate or Flow as it was previously known. One of the newer capabilities in the Power family is something called Power Virtual Agents. And these are nothing more than bots. They have a fancier name, but effectively what we're doing here is we are building bots using this particular tool that Microsoft provides. And only recently, so it's only a few months that this capability actually exists. So you can head over to powerva.microsoft.com if you want to find out more about these. And there's obviously lots of details here and so on the page. We've gone straight into one bot that I've created for us here as an actual interaction. Now, what this lets you do is it lets you build all kinds of complex scenarios, what they call topics and entities, etc., etc. But we can go ahead and use these inside of Teams. If you want to use a bot like this inside of Teams, for instance, you go ahead and specify that you're wanting to target Teams. Because what we're building here are not Teams bots per se, but bots in the broader sense. So you can see we could be building bots here for Facebook, for Skype, for Slack, etc., etc. And Teams is just one of the things that we can go ahead and empower through this context. And when we're building a bot inside of Power Virtual Agents, let's look, for example, at one of the interactions. What it does here, by the way, is it puts a little mini chat window, if you like, inside of here. What's called an emulator window, effectively inside of here, and it lets us actually interact with that bot. So if we go ahead and look at one of the topics or capabilities inside of the engine here, we have a welcome capability, if you like, in terms of how the bot will actually say hello to a user. So let's just open that up and see what that looks like. So what it's saying here is that if it detects one of these phrases coming in, hello, etc., we have to go ahead and define what we want to provide. Then what it will do is it will hit into the sequence of actions, which in this case is to send 1, 2, 3 separate meetings. So let's just pick one of these, for example, hi support. If I go ahead and type that into the bot, it's a little confusing because I'm both the bot creator and I'm acting as a regular user at the same time, but I think you'll get the idea. It's basically showing us that it's gone through this interaction, and as we expected to see 3 messages, it's gone ahead and actually sent us these 3 messages. So this is a very powerful interaction. You can see that there are all kinds of capabilities that we can build inside of our bots. So if I look at, let's say, one of the, so to speak, what they call here a simple topic, just lesson 1 pre-built. If you go ahead and choose one of the pre-built templates here, it's the idea of going ahead and asking for store opening hours. So I can use one of those trigger phrases. Let's just see if that's working. Everything's going a little slowly. When are you open? For example, is one of those trigger phrases. Oh, some crazy delays. Let's see if that works correctly. And what it will do is it will go ahead and identify which topic it's supposed to be working against. It'll identify that it's this one, and once again, we'll actually see it go through the different phases and provide us the different topics. Now, these can get quite complicated. Right now, we've always had ones that will just try and work out what the topic is and provide us straight text. But if we go ahead and just look at one last thing in terms of these Power Virtual Agents, we'll see here a sort of a more complicated scenario looking at some branching and different paths that the user can go down based on what they're trying to do. So let's just see what that looks like. And you can see here, this is going to take us through trying to find a particular store in a particular location. So what it will do is it will, if you ask it, it will tell you about the 3 stores, and depending on what you click on, it will go ahead and give us some interaction based around that. So let's just choose an option inside here, and we'll say, for example, store location. Now, I'm not going to use one of the exact texts. You'll notice I'm just using a piece of it. It does have some intelligence to go ahead and identify that even if it's not matching exactly, there's some AI around this identifying which one it's from. And what it's done is it's gone and executed the first part, and it's now waiting for an interaction. So if we go ahead and choose one of those, for example, again, it's following and being aware that we've gone through this particular dialogue. The user won't see this. This is simply for testing purposes, but the idea is that it's giving the Power Virtual Agents are giving us a very powerful ability to create some kind of bot interaction that we could then go ahead, as I mentioned, and publish into Teams. So, for instance, if we want to see that, let's see if we can actually get this all working. And we can actually publish it directly into Teams. It might give us a little hassle just because I've got multiple accounts and things open. But let's see if we can get it working nicely. So I'll jump back over to the Megan user, and let's see if we can go ahead and get that bot working directly inside of Teams. Come on, there you go, going slowly. Been a long day for all of us. Okay, I think in this case it's just the access rights. I'm trying to go from one tenant to the other. But basically, we should have that same kind of experience that we saw before, directly appearing inside of Teams. That might be an approval thing across the tenants. But essentially, Power Virtual Agents giving us the ability to go ahead and build bots. The pricing becomes very interesting though. So go ahead and do a little bit more research. But last time I checked, I think it was about $1,000 a month, something along the order of that, to be able to go ahead and create and publish bots. Now, it gives you a huge allowance for that, but that price point alone may be pricing Power Virtual Agents outside of the capability for certain organizations. So all of these things are going to have some ups and downs. Interestingly enough, though, Power Virtual Agents, the ability to actually create these things is actually under the covers using a tool that Microsoft has created called the Bot Framework Composer. It's using a sort of a limited version of that although powerful, has some limits in terms of the customization because it's trying to make it a lot more digestible to the user. We can go ahead and download this as a standalone tool, Bot Framework Composer, where we can go even a step further. You can see we're sort of naturally progressing in terms of complexity, in terms of the different examples. So what we can do is build far more powerful bots using the Bot Framework Composer directly. So this is an example using one of the wizard items that comes with it, for example. Once again, I'm building a bot, but this gives us the ability to host it in a different kind of hosting scenario, for example, and provide far more extensive capabilities. So how it recognizes text, for example, we have more capabilities there. The way that we can host the bot, for instance, provides us a lot of detail. So just to give an idea, as I mentioned, Power Virtual Agents, you're looking at $1,000 a month. With this tool, there's no cost because you're not hosting the bot anywhere. It's enabling you to build it, and you can then go ahead and distribute it by publishing to a cloud. And there are different approaches to how you can go ahead and publish inside of Azure. But Azure Functions, for example, you might go from $1,000 a month down to literally mere pennies a month to go ahead and host a bot, depending on what capabilities you're using. So from a price perspective, this becomes I won't say better. It really depends on your scenario. As I said, that $1,000 buys you a lot, but this might fit the price point, whereas the other one might not. However, there's a huge amount of additional complexity that is hidden from you in Power Virtual Agents that's available inside of here. So, for instance, if I go ahead and look at a particular scenario, you can see here that how we format the text, for example, is all kinds of additional complexities. The way that we control and deal with the process flow of dealing with a user, for example, is far more complicated. So this is a user welcome conversation, sub-conversation, if you like, and it enables the user to go ahead and, or the bot to send messages, the user to go ahead and ask questions, for example. But they might ask something like, it'll ask for your name, and it's asking here, why do you want my name? Well, if it recognizes that, for instance, if the user says one of these phrases, then it will go ahead and run down this particular path, and we can go ahead and build these complex bot interactions and complex capabilities. But there's tremendous power, but there's also a much larger learning curve in terms of dealing with this tool. There's also particular syntax that you need to use depending on where you are. I can't find it right now, but just in terms of how we would go ahead and create some of the different language terms, for example, it's very powerful, but it becomes a far more detailed learning curve trying to build a bot this way. And then the final option is the greatest in terms of complexity, but also the greatest in terms of flexibility, is to go ahead and actually build a bot. So this would be a development. You'd need a developer on your team. If you're a developer, you'd be sharpening those skills, or if not, you need to find a developer on your team. But Microsoft, for bots and teams, leverages something called the Bot Framework. It's Bot Engine under the covers. And you are going to be working with code here. So if anybody here is familiar with C#, for example, and there are other languages at play as well, but we have the ability to go ahead and write code that will have an interaction with the bot. This particular example is called the Echo bot because it's very simple. It simply writes back whatever the user said. So if you say hello, it will send a message saying echo hello. Hence the name Echo bot. It's simply just writing back to the user. But it's a great starting point if you're trying to learn bots to get started. But what I want to show you here is that's just one of a very large number of samples that Microsoft provides. So this is certainly the greatest in terms of complexity, but it is also an ever-growing space, and Microsoft provides a huge amount of capability to enable us to build these bots. I just wanted to find something. Oh, there it is. Sorry, couldn't find the tab. One of the things that Microsoft also provides is a lot of AI capabilities for building these bots. One of these is something called Language Understanding Services, or LUIS. And the idea here behind LUIS is this is what was powering a lot of what we saw in some of the previous interactions under the cover. I mentioned that $1,000, for example. Part of what you're getting there is you're getting a lot of additional services bundled in with the Power Virtual Agents. One of those is the LUIS Language Understanding Services. So if we have a look, for instance, at one of the sample apps, the flight demo that Microsoft provides, for example, you'll see some of the metaphors that you saw appearing later. And what we're doing here is I'm not going to go too much in detail of this, but this is how we train a bot to understand words and to understand phrases. So we're training a bot that these are the kind of things users might be saying to us, and understand and help us infer that, for instance, they are trying to book a flight versus cancel the process, get weather, etc., etc. So the Lewis becomes quite an important service as you go ahead and start building bots. In fact, that's what I wanted to illustrate for this slide. What we're trying to do with Lewis, under the covers of all of the options, really, is to take the jumble of words that are in a human's head and convert those into structure and logic from a bot perspective. So really what I wanted to show you today is hopefully why bots are useful and how they can greatly enhance the user's interaction with Teams and the value that Teams brings. And we've looked at a few different ways to go ahead and build them. We started off very simple in terms of flow, and you saw that it's super easy to get up and running to use some of the capabilities there. We then extended into Power Virtual Agents and saw that it also provides tremendous power, but has some of its own limitations. So there's different balances of where you might want to go. We mentioned also that Composer powers that, but you can also use Composer to build your own custom bots, or you can go with pure custom dev. Now, I've put together a little table here to sort of explain and summarize some of those capabilities. This is far from complete, but obviously you can get access to the slides, and at least gives you some things to think about. So again, some of the things maybe we didn't touch on, something like Flow, for example, super easy to get up and running, but we don't have a great application lifecycle process. So it's very tricky to have something like a development versus a test versus a production environment for a bot that you're building there, or a particular flow that you're building, for example. So these are some of the things that you need to be a little bit conscious of going down each of these routes. Okay. That's pretty much all from me. What I wanted to mention to you, obviously, is that analytics is a key part of some of these scenarios. Just to go ahead and close this out, analytics is a key part of some of these scenarios. So if we look, for instance, at the Power Virtual Agent tool, and I just have to orient myself again, sorry, just to find the correct browser window. Let's just find the Power Virtual Agents. There we go. The virtual agents, for example, provide native analytics of some sort inside of the box. A lot of the custom bots that you build, Microsoft provides tremendous capabilities on Azure, for example, to provide some analytics. So there's some great analytics in the box in some of those options to give you details around the bot itself. But what this is doing, for instance, is it's telling you how many users are using the bot, maybe how long they chatted with the bot, etc., etc. But what these won't do is tell you whether the user's interaction of the bot or the custom bots that you're building are improving the company's usage and value and engagement with Teams itself over time. So that's where the likes of the Cardiolog, the tremendous tools that the Cardiolog guys provide, will go ahead and help you. So I'll hand back over to Lizanne to take you through some of those capabilities. But before we do, I just want to say thank you all for attending. I hope you all found it useful and got some good value out of this. Please do go ahead and feel free. I've put my email address. That's the easiest form. Twitter and so on aside, email is still the easiest. So if you do have any questions about anything we've seen today, or you'd like to chat about any of those things, please go ahead and get in touch. I'd be more than happy to chat about any of these, as I mentioned, topics that I'm certainly myself very fond of and very passionate about. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Lizanne. Thank you all.
Thanks, Hilton, for that not only interesting but very helpful information. Exactly as Hilton said, using one feature in Teams, such as chat, for example, obviously does not mean that a company has had successful adoption. So because they are using Teams, doesn't also mean that users are being productive and that users are being collaborative. So I will show you another way of driving collaboration. So I would like to show you Cardiolog Analytics, Teams Analytics, and also how our engagement tool or bot uses that data to automatically reach out to those users who are not as active or not using the platform to its full potential in order to get them to be more active. And the key word today, more collaborative. With Cardiolog Analytics for Teams, you can quickly and easily get insights about usage and analytics in any of the Office 365 platforms actually, such as all the users who did not take advantage of a specific feature, and then you can easily connect with users by sending and receiving targeted messages and notifications in Teams to create that awareness and promote those new features. So also the Engage bot then sends push notifications. I will show you the Engage bot in the form of Teams channel messages based on Cardiolog Engage campaign triggers. And messages are automatically sent to inactive users, so those who never performed any action in a specific Office 365 environment, or users who belong to a specific environment, whether it's SharePoint, or in this case Teams, or OneDrive, or more. Let's have a closer look at some of these Teams reports. So I will just show you a couple of these dashboards, and then obviously how to use this data and these insights in Cardiolog Engage. So if we look here at the Teams usage overview, here you can see the Teams reports that give you an overview of the usage activity in Teams, including the percentage of active users and inactive users. And the whole point is so you can quickly see and easily see how many users across your organization are using Teams to communicate and to collaborate. For example, if we look at this top Teams table, this visual displays obviously which teams are more active, and you can filter that by the most number of members and channels and messages, really any data that you're curious about, to see which teams are more active or more inactive. And then those inactive ones are obviously the ones that need a little bit more training and that need a little bit more support. And what's also really nice is that we can see who obviously our top teams are and how active each top team is, and that gives a really good benchmark of what like we said, a productive, a successful, a team that collaborates, what that looks like. What's also really neat is that you can see the latest date for any team activity. So if they did not respond, for example, in 30 days, in 14 days, then you can maybe archive those teams and give some more training to those teams. You can also go even more in depth. You can sort this by office and department. I will show you that when I hop into the next dashboard. So if we look here at engagement overview, so this report gives you insights into which users in your organization are engaged with Teams and the type of activities they perform in Teams. So it contains a series of visuals ready to be quickly filtered, and that could be filtered by department or office, like I said. And that will really help you to understand which users are communicating through channel messages, which ones are communicating through private chat messages, who's participating in meetings and calls, and actually sharing content and using those important apps in Teams. So if I just quickly look here at team messages versus private messages. So this pie chart details the amount of messages posted in Teams channels and the amount of messages in private chats during the selected date range. So this usage report shows that users are primarily or only sometimes using Teams for private chats, like Hilton mentioned earlier. So in this example, you may want to review your team scenarios because users are chatting outside of these initial teams and channels that were set up. And also, if we look at access type, this chart details the amount of times each device was used to connect to Teams. So if you see that not many users are using a certain device to access Teams, it will obviously indicate to me that those users are not sure how to do so. So now we know this. So what can we do to help? You can maybe post a step-by-step installation instructions for that specific device, the one that's lagging, in a channel, and that will obviously help drive usage of a wider device range. If I quickly hop into team overview, in this report, it highlights the activity within a specific team, including the number of members, number of channels, messages, things such as the top contributors, and also popular threads. And the point here is so you can quickly see how the users in your team are using the platform to communicate and to collaborate, and obviously who to target. And then if I hop into influential users real quick, this dashboard is great because this report identifies your top champions. So those who are essential to driving awareness, adoption, and education in your organization. And a champion is a person primarily motivated by helping others. So a person who is interested in Teams, helping other employees use the platform in alignment with your best practices. And this report also contains a couple of other visuals and is ready to be filtered by date, by team, channel, or user attributes such as, again, Office and department. And this is how you can quickly see which users are most active and also the interactions between them. So in this dashboard, you can see down to user level, and obviously once you have this information about user level, you can then use this to drive adoption by finding out who these influential users are. You can see who's using Teams the most, and once you know who these users are, maybe reach out to them, invite them to share some tips, maybe host a quick session explaining some how-tos on using Teams or using bots or using a new feature in order to motivate and support those inactive users. And then the last dashboard that I quickly want to show you before hopping into the engagement part, the automated part, is influential content. So this report gives you insights into which content users in your organization are engaged with in Teams. And that will obviously help you to understand how valuable your users feel that your content is, which topics are most popular to them, and which content is being shared and which teams and channels are being mentioned the most. So for example, for each team and channel, you can see if they are sharing content, if they are using apps. So if a customer wants to give training for teams, and we know a specific team isn't using an app, for example, they might not know it's a functionality. So when we train, this really helps us to know what really to focus on. And all of this is in order to drive adoption and drive consumption of Teams. Our Engage bot uses those insights that I've just shown you to actively drive more activity, in essence, to drive adoption and to drive collaboration. So let me quickly show you how you can leverage Cardiolog Engage to obviously drive collaboration, drive adoption, and drive more users to be active in Teams. So for example, if you have noticed in the data that there are users who did not interact with Microsoft Teams ever, or maybe in the last 2 weeks, obviously you want to take action, you want to intervene, and you want to make sure that these users are actually taking advantage and using Teams to its full potential. So you will launch a campaign, and whenever Cardiolog Engage tells you that these specific users who you have selected in your campaign haven't interacted with Teams in that specific amount of time that you've said, then a message will automatically be sent to them in the channel of your choice. I will show you the channels now, and that will send them a message, a reminder, RSVP, maybe users who belong to SharePoint, or maybe you want to target all users belonging to a specific team. Say, for example, there's a team called the conferences team, and you realize that that specific team hasn't been very active in Teams, and they are not using Teams to its full potential. They are not using the new features. They are only chatting, not having calls, not having any meetings. Obviously, you want to intervene, and you want to make sure that they are aware of these features and that they are using these features and that they are being productive and collaborative. So you will then send a message to the specific audience that you set. So the channel, you can either send them a quick text message, or maybe they're very active in SharePoint but not in Teams. So you can even send them a message that will appear as a pop-up in Teams, either as a header or a footer, maybe email, or what is better than driving them to Teams and sending them a message that will pop up automatically right within the Teams platform as a channel message. And this message can maybe say, I've noticed that you haven't been active in Teams in the last month. Please give me some feedback as to why that is. So it's bi-directional communication. Or maybe you want to send them a reminder about Teams training, then they can RSVP. Maybe you just want to send them a quick link. Maybe you want to send them a link back to Teams, or a link back to, like I said earlier, a guide to help them to understand more about how to use bots in Teams. Whatever your goal is as an organization, you can then send them that specific content in order to drive them to the Teams platform and to drive them to actually start working and being productive and collaborative. And then the last step will be the trigger. Do you want to send this message immediately? You want to schedule it to be sent at a specific date or time, or you can trigger it based on their behavior. So that will be the behavior in SharePoint. So when they are scrolling down a page or viewing a specific page, the moment they do that, maybe viewing a page for 10 seconds or viewing a page for 15 seconds or 30 seconds, then the moment they actually do that, automatically this pop-up appears within Teams. this message appears within Teams or this pop-up appears within SharePoint with this message that you have created. So automatically the message is being sent to them based on their behavior in the portals, in the platforms, and all of that information is from Cardiolog Analytics. We quickly get back to our presentation. A huge thank you to Hilton for joining us today and sharing your expertise and very valuable information about bots, about analytics with all of us. And your presentation, like I said, was not only interesting, but very, very helpful. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. And then just as a reminder, for you to view again or to share with your colleagues who were unable to attend, we invite you to visit us at cardiologanalytics.com or to book your free demonstration or free trial of Cardiolog Analytics or Cardiolog Engage, so we can show you all of our capabilities for SharePoint, also for Yammer, for OneDrive, for Exchange. And yes, you can also tweet us at Cardiolog. And then for more information, helpful tips, you can check out our blog at blog.intlog.com. And then for more information, you can either contact us at info@intlog.com or you can contact Hilton at hg@chitchatter.com. Yes, so a big thank you to everyone who joined. Hilton, thank you.
Yeah, from our side again, Lizanne, likewise, thank you to you for inviting me.
One quick question from Gary. Gary wants to know, do you have to enter all of the questions and answers, or is there intelligence that can find the answers on a site or database?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So some of the phrases you saw there, you do have to give some definition of what you're trying to aim for, in terms of like, is it a hello or is it a if you think about a reminders tool, for example, there's a series of sort of help style commands like help or help me or I need help or I need assistance, those kind of things. So you group that as what's called an intent. So some of those you precede a tool like Lewis, for example, and others it will infer, and you also sort of continually train the machine learning engine over time as well. So as I mentioned, you sort of broadly create those intents. So if you think about the reminders tool, for example, there's a help intent, there's a create reminder intent, and there's like a view reminders intent, for example. So you create those sort of broad use cases. In terms of actual questions, that was, I suppose, looking at the teammate tool, for instance, where you had, that isn't so much interacting with the commands of a bot, but more sort of a Q&A style interaction of questions like, where were the bathrooms and what is an ABC, etc. So that behind the covers makes use of another service that Microsoft also provides for bots. Lewis is one of the main, there's sort of two main ones and a few other fringe ones. Lewis is one for language understanding, and the other one is something called the Q&A Maker, QNAMAKER. .ai, I think, which is a knowledge base or a Q&A style capability that Microsoft provides, which enables you to plug that into a bot relatively easily. And then what you do is you need to sort of seed it with questions, and you can have multiple questions that are different ways of asking, phrasing a certain question that will lead to an outcome, for example. And again, the AI will also understand elements of that. So for instance, I put in, I think, where are the bathrooms? And it figured out that, toilets and bathrooms mean the same thing, for instance. And so, yeah, you do need to maintain those questions over time. It won't know what kind of things are contextual to your organization, but there is a specific user interface around that which is specifically geared to Q&A. So it's a lot more friendly than, let's say, the Power Virtual Agents interface, things like that. And there are other ways that you can seed those questions. So there's one of the options, for instance, is to use an Excel spreadsheet. So that's great if you're technical in the organization, but HR is the one who needs to ask and manage those questions. They can, for example, seed the initial, whatever it is, 50 questions, shall we say, and then over time they can send you an updated spreadsheet, and you kind of just ingest it into the tool. That tool can also even go ahead and access an FAQ web page and understand the notion of questions and answers on there and build it from there. So, for instance, if you have an FAQ on your website, you can point it at that, and it will sort of infer the questions and answers that you can ask there as a great starting point as well. So, yeah, if that's something you're interested in, look at QNAMaker.ai, which is, again, it's a separate service, but it's part of the Microsoft Azure Microsoft Cloud tools.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, Hilton, and everyone else who stayed with us. And we will send you this recording. Thanks, Hilton.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.